Thank you, and thanks everybody for staying through the conference. I know it's getting towards the end, so hopefully you find a lot of value out of this one. But let's talk about AWS Terraform Landing Zone Accelerator Preview. This is a keyword, preview. So we do intend on releasing this. We'll talk a little bit more about it in Q4, but right now it's kind of in an early limited release. We've had some pilot customers that we've been doing this with, but we wanted to kind of come here because of HashiCorp and introduce this one for you. So let's get into it. What do our customers want to do on AWS? Give you a little bit of background on why we did this. So one of the things that we see is customers want to build. They just want to focus on what's differentiating. We don't see customers that want to do, they don't want to do the things that are heavy lifting. If you think about things like RDS and things that we create as services, they just want to go and build things. So that's a key thing that we want to focus on. They want to move fast. So they want to go from idea to instantiation pretty quick, so we want to support that. And then they want to stay secure, so if they want to do it. If you look at all these ones, these are kind of just common themes that we see across all the customers, and these are themes that we see customers coming to us with. But if you pick one out of here, stay secure tends to kind of rise up to the top. So if you look about it and you think about a landing zone and everything about that, a lot of it is about the guide rails. Everything, the guardrails that we put up, everything around how we secure accounts and how we treat everything for it. So if you look at that, what we really want in here is we want to be able to create multiple accounts, which enables a strong isolation barrier between workloads. So if you think back to the other things, we want to move fast, we want to build, we want to stay secure. One of the ways that we do this to help stay secure, we came up with a concept quite a few years ago about multiple accounts. We started seeing a lot of enterprises go into where they instantiated a lot of different accounts, sometimes in the thousands of accounts. When you get to that scale, how do you do it? How do you do it in a prescriptive, repeatable manner? So if we look at that, there's also some challenges with the multi-account environment. Some of those are many design decisions. You have to decide a lot of things. We give you a nice platform, nice framework, but you have to decide a lot of things. That tends to slow you down when you want to go and do it. You have to configure all these ones. If you're doing this, you have to have a repeatable process when you give above and you're trying to do enterprise scale. So if you want to scale something out, you need some way to keep on repeating this process. And you have to establish a security baseline and governance. So this is, you're coming into the cloud, you're licensed to operate. If you don't secure things in the cloud, you're going to have issues with it. So when we looked at this, if you look back a couple years ago, we came up with the AWS Landing Zone. And this is a CloudFormation-based approach. It uses all the tools that are native to AWS. And it was our first iteration of trying to go ahead and deploy an automated way to manage multiple accounts for that. If any of you have been to reInvent or watch anything around in the blogs, we came up last year with Control Tower. It's another way to go ahead and provision accounts, do some governance around the accounts. Released a couple months ago on that. But we've also been seeing a lot of customers that are baselining, and most of the people here are probably well familiar with this, baselining on Terraform. So if you're deploying things on Terraform, we've gotten customers that have said, hey, you know what, we're hybrid, multi-cloud, we have different reasons for picking Terraform. We want a Terraform solution. So last year, we started working on something called an AWS TLZ, so a Terraform landing zone. And if you look at these and how they break out and what's the separation between them, AWS Control Tower, it's a service. It's the least effort of anything that you have to do. Go in, click a few buttons, start to provision accounts. Because it's a service, a little bit more restrictive. Some of the other things may not have all the features, may not have the functionality that you want. AWS Landing Zone really put the infrastructure as a code model in there. A lot of CloudFormation, which is our baseline infrastructure as code for AWS. But one of the things that we started seeing was, especially in enterprises, the ecosystem is not just AWS. It's partners, it's other tooling, it's everything as code. And we started seeing a lot more push and pressure on us to do everything as code. So when we took a look at the TLZ and we see, hey, there's a lot of providers, we can do everything as code. Everything from documentation to third parties and everything on the provisioning side of it. So that's what we were trying to tackle on this one. And if you look at it though, they're all heading to the same destination. All these things here, whichever one you pick, it's an easy deploy solution to set up multi-account environments. But this one here, we're going to focus on AWS TLZ. We're going to talk about what this one is, and this is a preview. I'll iterate that again. So feedback, any input, greatly appreciated for that. So it is a Terraform-based solution that automates the provisioning of a secure and governed AWS multi-account environment and extendable to third parties. And that's the key thing that we wanted to see on that. So we've actually already have some, and we'll talk about a couple of them, where we've actually even implemented in the first iteration here some third-party extensions on that one. So what is it really baked into it? It's based on AWS and Terraform best practices and recommendations. So we have a lot of workshops, projects, different ways that we can go through and work with customers, and we've come up with a lot of best practices. We have programs that go deep dive into security. Security epics is what we call it. We've based everything that we've baked into that based on those best practices and best practices that we've gotten from Terraform as well. It gives you the initial security and governance controls. We don't want to pretend that we know everything about everybody's business. Depending on what industry you're in, you may have different regulatory compliance rules. You may be in financial, you may have HIPAA, you may have motion picture type stuff, governance in there. So we give you the initial security and governance. We do expect that you probably have to add a little bit to it, depending on your own industry, if you have certain regulatory and compliance ones. It's based on a concept of what we call core accounts and what we call the account vending machine. Account vending machine is kind of the heart of everything that produces and kicks off the whole entire process. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that one in another slide. And the key thing for this one here, though, it is an automated and compliant account provisioning system. Go ahead and enter in a few little details, kick it off. At the end of it, you get an account that is fully vended, that's already attached into single sign-on if you're doing it, that already has your vulnerability tools already scanning that account. Everything's ready to go to give it to your partner. Because the whole idea about this from a platform perspective is you want to put workloads on it. So remember, this isn't differentiating for you. We just want to do it quickly. So how do we go ahead and do the deployment on this? One thing that I'll note on this, just so everybody knows, if you know the difference between the open source, Terraform Cloud now that was introduced this week, Terraform Enterprise, we have, for a couple different reasons, we've based this on Terraform Enterprise. So want to caveat that is that we do have, because of certain features and things that were in there like Sentinel, now that Terraform Cloud has come around, we are looking at what we can do to support Terraform Cloud. There's nothing in here, it's Terraform code. There's nothing in here that prevents you, if you're doing the open source, from taking the code and using it, modifying it. But we do have it baked into where we do expect something of the degree of Terraform Enterprise. With Terraform Enterprise, though, you've always got this thing, a chicken and egg problem. Because what we see is most people don't have Terraform Enterprise when we come in. So the first thing we have to do is, it's a brand new account, we have to go and bootstrap it. So the one manual thing that has to be done is you have to set up a master payer. That's your top level account for AWS. Yes, it's where usually your bills come in through. We do have to set up a few what we call core accounts, shared services, login account, a security account. But the only reason why we have to set those ones up, and we do those through Terraform as well, is because we have to deploy Terraform Enterprise. And we have to deploy your VCS. We've worked with GitHub Enterprise, and we worked with Bitbucket, and we expect to add GitLabs in here as well. So pick your VCS, whichever one that Terraform supports. We'd like to support all of those as well. All the provision of that and bootstrapping is done through Terraform code. But the key for it is once we get this stood up, now we've got an instance of Terraform Enterprise, our key thing is we want to deploy the account vending machine. So account vending machine is a module, gets deployed out, gets part of the PMR in Terraform Enterprise. And its big key thing is to actually do the provision of the core and organization accounts. We'll talk a little bit about that one too. Configure the supporting services. So if you think about being an enterprise customer, you're probably on enterprise support. You're going to create a lot of accounts. You don't want to create support tickets manually. Remember, everything's as code. Part of some of the things that we do in there is notify the support, create a support ticket, get that account already on enterprise support on that. And we trigger what we call a baseline. So when you look at an account that gets actually stood up, we think there's two aspects of it. We want to support two different objectives. We want the baseline to support the key things that the platform does. It's around VPC deployments. It's about security. It's about networking that you're doing. These are the guide rails that we're doing. The other thing that we want, and one of the reasons why we're big proponents on Terraform Enterprise, is we also want to extend this out to the business or your organizational unit. We want them to do infrastructure as code. We want them to follow good practices of everything as code. So when we go through this process of provisioning a baseline and an account, we actually do it through two workspaces. One workspace is where the baseline goes. The other workspace is what we give to the business. So you go through, you kick this process off, we'll walk through it. You have an account request. We see a lot of enterprises leaning towards like ServiceNow and stuff. We'd like to get that integration, but I'll be honest, we've got a really nice swivel chair right now. It's a web-based form that you can come in, enter in your details, and kick the process off. The key thing for this on the account vending machine, one thing to note on this to make sure that it's clear, it is a module in Terraform Enterprise. But one of the things as we went through this is we found that there are times where using our native services and using Terraform, there's a better fit in certain cases. So a lot of what the account vending machine is based on is actually leveraging some of our standard tools. DynamoDB, SSM automation, Lambdas, S3. But remember, the entire provision of this is done through Terraform for that once it gets stood up. So that goes and kicks off. It creates the account. It goes and kicks off another Terraform template that goes and does all the baselining to that account, which adds all the security, adds all the permissions for that account, turns on audit logging, and does the networking for that account. We also then extend that to the supporting services. So remember, that's a key thing. We don't want to just stop there. We want to go and provision your code repo. So now we've actually provisioned a place for the business to come and use. We want to go and provision Terraform. So Terraform now has a workspace. We want to provision audit logging and hooking into whatever SIEM tool that you have, being able to present those audit logs to them. Monitoring, if you have a monitoring tool, turn on monitoring as well. And also single sign-on. What we've seen in the pilot customers, Okta's been a kind of a key player in there. So we actually go and do all the provisioning for Okta as well. So the idea, remember, it's doing the whole chain. So take automation as far as we can on that one. And at the end, you get a vended account. And like I said before, account gets vended, customer gets notified, who's ever done the account request. Well, that account has already been scanned. Everything's been turned on that account. So if they start looking at an account, vulnerability tools are already fired off, and they're already looking at that account. So a little bit about how the account structure is on this one here. We've got a master payer. That's the key one. That is the one that there's really no way of doing this one except for manually. You've got to go and request this one, set this up. Once you get that set up, then you can kick off some Terraform. And you kick it off, now we don't have Terraform Enterprise, so you're kicking off Terraform up through the open source. And we're standing up 3 different accounts under what we call a core organizational unit. And the core organizational unit is really a construct of where we see most of the teams that are going to be using this type of service or looking at this tend to be the infrastructure teams, platform services teams, and enterprises on that. So we go and we configure shared services because that's generally where people want to put their Terraform and their VCS. Terraform Enterprise, do logging, do security. Once that's done and we have those accounts stood up, we now have all the tools. So now we can start using the account vending machine and actually go and provision the other core accounts. So now we've got networking, we've got a break glass account, we've got those two accounts that we add into it. And then it's flexible enough that if you have an additional account or something else that you want, we've seen in one organization, they wanted an infrastructure shared services. So they wanted an additional core account. So it's not limited to these 6. It's flexible enough that you can add some. You don't have to do infrastructure shared services on that. But those are your core accounts. You protect them. You keep them ring fenced. You don't let anybody really get into those ones. But then you want to start provisioning other accounts. You want to do potentially developer accounts. You want to do sandbox accounts. You can pick to do developers or not do developers, pick to choose sandbox or not choose sandbox on those. We also set up a couple other organizations that we want to set up. One is for testing. If you think about this organizational construct, we have a concept called service control policies, where we can put some governance and restrict people down. Well, if you're doing service control policies, you need a way to test them. You don't want to deploy them to an org unit, not test them. So set up an organization that's just for testing. Set up an organization for archive. These accounts have a life cycle to them. They come in, they go out. You want to go and delete an account, doesn't go away right away. You may want to move it to the archive, put an SCP against it that then limits any access or anything that you can do to that account. But the key for all this, and the only reason why we do this, is for the LOB OUs. You can call this org what you want. It can be based on application. It could be based on division, line of business. We don't really discriminate or care which way you want to go with it. It's just how you want to break up your accounts. And when we look at it, though, we see that there's really 2 patterns that come in here. Because we're never going to be able to tell what is your software development lifecycle. Do you do dev, QA, stage, pre-prod, prod, load testing? So we never want to anticipate that. But since we have an account vending machine, we only disseminate between what's production and non-production. And it really comes down to what are the guide rails that we're setting up for each environment. So when you talk about a non-production account, you can set up, you can say, hey, for this particular application, I just want dev and stage. You can set up those 2 accounts underneath that, and then you can just put production in there. So you get some flexibility. You get to choose how you want to provision these ones. If you have a line of business that doesn't need a lot of segmentation, then set it up at the line of business site. But we do see that things tend to segment basically based on production and non-production on that. So big thing on here is around what's the security baseline that we do. And if you break down security, it's really broken into a couple different things: detective controls and preventative controls. And if we look at the detective controls, what do we configure with this right away? What have we already built into the system? VPC flow logs are turned on right away. CloudWatch is turned on. CloudTrail is turned on at the organization. Guard duty is turned on and deployed to every single region because that's the best practice. You may not be going to all of our regions, but our best practice dictates that you want to have visibility into those regions to see if people are doing things in those regions, even if you're not using them. Config, and some policies around config. And then, like I mentioned on this, for third parties, one of the third parties that we've seen out of here is Redlock. So it's third-party vulnerability tool. We go and use that one, and we've already baked that one into it. So account gets provisioned, Redlock already starts scanning it. Has already the authorizations, everything that it needs to come in and do all the scanning for it. So these are good. They detect things, but it's even better if you can prevent things. So we've also built out, and one of the reasons why we like Terraform Enterprise and Terraform Cloud is we're a big proponent on Sentinel. So having Sentinel policies in there. KMS, treat it as a module, so you can do that for encryption. Secrets Manager, IAM, SCPs are a big thing, service control policies. And then for Logging in, single sign-on, we see Okta generally gets used quite a bit. So we do all the provisioning for Okta as well on that. So the key here is, one of the key things that we had was make sure from a governance perspective that we're doing all the right things around security and doing it according to best practices on that. One of the things that we found out kind of going through this is all about, if you go back to the key tenets that we talked about early on, where people want to build and they want to move fast. Businesses just want to go, in a sense. And we're introducing, in a lot of cases, infrastructure as code to them. We're telling them to go. But they're going out and grabbing resources. They're grabbing an S3 resource, but they don't really know how to do it. But we already have, through our knowledge and experience, we've already built out what we consider best practices for that. We also think that in some cases, you come in with some of your own opinions on that, and that influences how you want to deploy a bucket, an S3 bucket. So we have this concept here for what we call the curated module one. And what we do is we take the resource and we add all of our best practices. We think over time, companies will come in and add their own best practices to this. And then with that, we can deploy a curated module. And we expose this through the PMR. So if you think back, why did we standardize on Terraform Enterprise? Really, the key things were we saw a lot of value in the PMR. We saw a lot of value in the workspaces and managing things centrally. We think this is a solution for hundreds of accounts. So a tool like Terraform Enterprise and using Sentinel makes a lot of sense on that. But the curated module has been really powerful that we've seen in a couple of the pilot customers. What they're able to do with this is they're able to build up a portfolio of modules that then the business comes and grabs. And a lot of times we have Sentinel policies that make them conform to this. So if you remember, what we recommend is you set up the guide rails. But this is the cloud. Things are moving at an intensive pace. New services are coming out all the time. We're not always going to have a curated module for these ones. So we may have a new feature, a new service that somebody wants to try in S3. Maybe they can go and grab that. We don't want to put any restrictions on them. They can grab that resource. But if they're not doing encryption on it, we block it. So at least they have to come up to the baseline and the governance standards. The best thing that happens is when you get into the business and you start seeing repeatable patterns, think of how you can sort of grow this. Now you've got business that's coming in. They're grabbing an S3, they're grabbing an RDS, they're grabbing an EC2, they're grabbing an ECS. They just start grabbing these modules and they can stitch them together pretty quickly. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And then you start building out patterns. So build out patterns on how people can repeat this process. So with that, what do we think are the benefits as we get into this? And this is what drove us really, is everything has to be automated. You're talking heavy volumes, you're talking a lot of accounts and management. So it's not only the automation of provisioning the accounts, but these accounts and things, you need to treat this as a product. New security requirements are going to come up. How can you automate reapplying the baseline across 200, 300, 500 accounts? So how are you going to do that? So our focus was, how do we automate this? How can we take automation to everything on this? Scalable, like I mentioned, could use it for 2 accounts, probably a lot better for 200 accounts in that case. Self-service, want people to move fast. You start putting up too many blockers for people to come in and request accounts, just slows them down. People may want to stand up an account, do some testing, do something new, give them a developer account, give them a sandbox account, let them go and do what they're trying to do on that. Big thing here, the guide rails, not blockers or guardrails. If this one really has a lot of power with it, because you do need to have confidence that things that get deployed into your environment are going to, they're not going to have access or egress access that they're not supposed to on that one. So set up the guardrails. Auditable. We think that spent a lot of focus on the logging, making sure that all the logs are being collected, making sure that they're exposable to a SIEM tool. Big thing about this, since you're using Terraform Enterprise and you're using VCS too, you have a way to manage too and do auditing on who's doing what changes when they're doing them. And flexible. We think we're going to cover most of the scenarios, but we don't think we're necessarily going to cover all the scenarios. So we know that we're really treating this like an accelerator. We think that you have unique requirements, you probably need things. If we can get you 80, 90% there, great. But if we can get you 100%, even better. But we want to get you as close as we can. But we don't want to also restrict you from adding in your own feature sets or doing things that you would see as a value to your business on it. So if we look at this, and some of the takeaways for this is it's Terraform Enterprise based, like I mentioned. We are investigating Terraform Cloud. We do see that we don't see any impediments to doing it, but since it's so new, we need to go and do a little bit more investigation on that one to make sure we can support it. Release is planned for Q4 of 2019. So that's when we intend to release this, and probably more importantly, its code will be open source and it'll be free. So take it, use it as a community. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are using the open source of Terraform and you can find value in just taking some of the things that we're doing, have at it. Go for it. And big thing for this one here is we'd like to see people give back to this. We're not going to necessarily anticipate all the different third-party items that are out there. If you're finding something and you're working through and you're adding something to this, give it back to the community. Remember, this is non-differentiating stuff. You're setting up Palo Alto egresses. Probably somebody else is setting up Palo Alto egresses. How does that change your differentiation between a business? It's just a way to do egress. It's what you put in the platform that differentiates you. So what we'd like to see on this here is, we've been very good about having a couple good pilot customers that have really been given to the community, and they want us to go and bring this one out. So we're able to make this available because of work that we've done, work that they've done. So it's been a collaborative effort. So give back to the community. It's a key thing on it. Any feedback, questions, or suggestions, you can email me on this one here. But remember, for us, one of our key tenets, and I wanted to kind of blast it through pretty quick because there's a couple of things I want to show you, a little bit make it more real. So I want to show you what we've done and show you at least the AVM, the module, and the PMR. But when we look at it, we're really committed to doing the undifferentiated heavy lifting, and that's why we want to give this to you. We want to get you to start actually being innovative, building things, and doing things as fast as you can on that. So key thing is, it's been a lot of marketing in a sense, but want to show you what the PMR looks like, and we actually tested this with, you'll notice that this is Terraform Cloud on this one here. So we actually took the module that was in our PTFE instance, now Terraform Enterprise, and just pushed it out earlier today on this one here. So this is the account vending machine module. We put all the documentation in there. We have quite a number of inputs for this one. We have the outputs on here. Key thing on here, there's 58 resources that get deployed when this goes up. So everything that we have to do around DynamoDB, everything that we have to do around Lambdas and doing these. So these Lambdas, because I just want to clarify on some of these things to make sure people understand for it. We leverage the Lambdas where we found issues or occurrences where it just made more sense to do it. One good example for that is we need access keys to get into the system. Terraform needs keys to get in. So we don't want those keys to ever get out. We don't want them to ever be exposed. Terraform is really good about having Vault and having them there. So what we have is we have a Lambda that actually generates the keys, calls the API, puts them into Vault, into Terraform in the workspace, and nobody ever sees them. They're not stored in a database, they're not retrievable. We don't care. They're ephemeral. We don't care about them. We can run that. In one case, we have the partner every night. 150 workspaces, 200 workspaces, rotate every one of the keys. All done through a Lambda and done for that. It's interacting with Terraform, it's doing that. So we see those areas where it just made sense. Running that through and doing that all through Terraform just didn't make as much sense. So we're able to do those things by leveraging some of the capabilities on here. And we have SSM automation and everything else that's baked into this one here. So one other thing from a baseline, so how much do you really get with this? And this one, okay, it's gonna be an eye chart. If you've ever had fun with graphing on Terraform Enterprise, or any Terraform if you do it in the thing, this is a graph output of what we do when we baseline an account. And if we bring this one up, you can see it's just a lot of different calls for policies and stuff. But the one thing is, when we go back, if you go back to the original tenants and what we talked about is, this is a lot of heavy lifting that doesn't differentiate you. So why don't we do it and give it to you and let you run with it? So that's the intent on that. So there's a lot of effort in here. I think right now, it varies depending on what the customer wants, but you go and baseline an account, you're looking at about 120 to 130 resources that get provisioned for that. So that's a lot of stuff that you don't have to manually do. You don't have to, kind of figure out how to do a lot of these things. We try to show you what are best practices for it. So, my clicker's not gonna work now. So, thank you, hope this had some value. Going back to this, if anybody, we're early in this, we do feel like we have it pretty good for the first release, but we're more than happy. We're customer focused, customer obsessed. If you guys have ideas or anything, reach out to me through email. If it sounds pretty good, but you'd like to see some other things, let us know. This is really baked on and built on the community here. And that's it. So thank you, everybody, and go build.